Good morning, good afternoon, good evening all. It's Bear here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, aboxwithnolid, a channel that I'm creating not only to bring awareness to the lived reality complex trauma creates, but also to delve into understanding the mechanisms behind it and its effects, and exploring ways of building a better foundation for yourself and ways of healing and ultimately resolving the aftermath trauma has. Now, in today's video, in part 1 and part 2, I want to explore a very complex mechanism that we all have. It is a very natural mechanism. And this mechanism is around dissociation. Now, there are as many viewpoints on dissociation as there are variations, levels, and layers of how it impacts people, how it impacts us in our day-to-day lives. But basically, we've all heard the statement of you ignore something long enough, it'll magically disappear. Well, this is a more literal sense of that playing out. This is a more real world sense of that playing out. Now, back in the hunter-gatherer days, we had delineated lines of threat. We knew when we were leaving the village, we were going into a threatful situation. When we came back, we were safe. We had community, we had support, we had meaning, and we were seen in purpose, and so forth and so forth. In our modern society, we don't. And this natural mechanism of coping, when things overload, when a threat response overloads, we know with fight or flight or freeze, our cognitive brain shuts down. Well, that's an aspect of dissociation. That is an aspect of where we separate from things we don't need to concern about, and our body and nervous system are focusing on surviving only. And that effectively, in my humble view, is what dissociation is. It's that mechanism of where all our resources are focusing on. And with dissociation in particular, it's meant to be short-term, not long-term. And as I said earlier, it's because we don't have any delineated lines as we did before for when we were under threat and when we were safe. Our threat mechanisms remain active, which means our dissociative mechanism remains active. And it's continually feeding that need and reinforcement of all our physiology's focus is on survival. And in doing so, we start to lose touch with everything that defines us as a person, because a person is a luxury. A personality is a luxury. The expressions, dreams, hopes, and desires are a luxury. We just have to survive. And that's what I mean by all these different layers. The more embedded your survival state is, the more embedded and the longer you live in a survival state, the more your nervous system and the more structures within your body through neuroplasticity, your brain, and all these different aspects wire around surviving. Which means you separate. You no longer are a conscious person. You are an object surviving. Your nervous system is so internalized on focusing and dealing with threats and managing threat and protecting from threat and assessing threat in our environment that we separate and we withdraw. And this is where dissociation becomes a real issue. And also add to that the layer in our modern society with technology that we can have all these mechanisms to completely escape our physical world and our physical reality. Now, we see this play out on so many layers within our society. We see how much of our society is derived around distraction, around marketing, as I've said in previous videos, around isolation and separating from being part of a community. It's kind of been bred into us in the modern society, especially in the Western world. And I usually, to make note, I refer to the Western world because outside the Western world, in many of the older style countries, you have culture, an embedded culture. And that adds another layer of when you start to work with trauma. And as you know, most English-speaking countries, or people, English-speaking people that would view my videos, are going to be part of the Western world. So when we look at this mechanism and how it is really driven around our survival, when we start to explore it, we are going to perceive that exploration as a threat. And hence, it becomes a real obstacle. And dissociation can lead to what we see in some people out there of a complete separation from themselves and reality. In the most extreme versions, it develops or progresses into what's called dissociative identity disorder, which is the modern day interpretation of schizophrenia, a non-chemical based schizophrenia. And later on, I want to do playlists where I can start to explore the theories that I've learned and the theories that I personally, believe are true around many of these areas. But when you start to understand these mechanisms and the structures behind them, and you see how physical, how neurological our body responses are in regards to threat, stress, and assessment of our environments and trauma, you can start to get your head around these mechanisms of preservation. And through that, you can start to learn ways of supporting the healing from them or the re-regulating. And with dissociation, it's not something you can really heal, it's something you can re-regulate. And again, in part 2, I'll delve into ways of looking at this from a healing perspective. But in part 1, I just want to make you guys aware of how prevalent this is in our society. And I'd say dissociation has never been more prevalent in human society in all our evolutions as it is today. With how we see, with how much technology is around distraction, not education and learning. It is fed into this mindset that so much is unsolvable. We need to isolate and create these artificial worlds, which when people have gone through a level of high threat, stress or trauma, that mechanism latches onto that. And it feeds it into an intensity of dysfunctionality that we have today. It's a phrase I kind of term that expectant dysfunctional state of where those who are dysfunctional expect to be allowed to be dysfunctional, to be accepted as dysfunctional. And that is not a healthy way to be or a healthy way to view society. And dissociation is a huge part of the mechanisms that create this. And it is a huge part of our day-to-day lives. We all isolate to a degree. We all have routines that distract us from the physical responsibilities that we have in our world and life. It's the thing of it is not to remove all the distractions. It's to regulate them in a healthy, productive way, to where we engage and address where we need to engage and address. So, as we go through these videos of mine, what I'm trying to do is show you guys and make you guys aware of things. And if you feel they are relevant in your world, to explore them. Now, there are lots of different ways of looking at dissociation, as I said. Be mindful in the research that you choose to do, because I know for myself, when I first started and I started recognizing certain things, it's that kind of, Googling a medical illness, you go, oh crap. When you don't have the breadth of understanding of keeping the assessments, the self-assessments, within a safe and accurate parameter. But it is still worth having a look at, because we are all guilty of putting things off. We're all guilty of ignoring things, hoping they'll magically disappear. And all of us that go through trauma, our nervous systems create a prison of not being able to cope. And the more we feed the walls of that prison, the more isolated we become. Dissociation is a huge part of a mechanism, of a survival state that separates a lot of people who've experienced trauma. And it all revolves around what we can process, what we can problem solve, and what we can cope with, and what we can grasp and understand. And it's working with teaching ourselves and continually to engage with ourselves to keep that in balance. So as always, I like and enjoy your feedback. Be mindful of the exploration of these things, but also take seriously the need to. Please be safe, please be kind and gentle, and I'll see you shortly in part 2.